So today I started properly writing my essay for the case study, and I completed up until the first point in my theme, and I have then decided to knit it. So this is what I've got so far. Wow. So the first half, up until this fluffy purpley pinky line, this bit is technically my context for my essay. So this shows what every colour means and represents, and then there is a graphic to go with that to explain. And this is because the colours are never quite the same as the ones on my document, so I wanted to make sure that it showed and represented that way. It's well enough across. It also shows the colour tones, so this is where your student view will be positive, neutral, negative, and same for views on communities practice, positive, neutral, negative, and constructive alignment theory, positive, neutral, negative. So I wanted to show what these colours represented, because if, for example, I had no positive information, just neutral and negative, and I said, oh, there's going to be one colour for this and one colour for this, if you saw these two colours together, you would assume that this would be your positive, but it might be it's just neutral because positive never came into play. So I wanted to make sure that was there to represent. I then started writing it. So this is my introduction. This is my point one. This theme is on student anxiety and worry towards assessment. I then have a quote which is linked to the Group 2 project we did on a podcast on anxiety, and that represents that bit. I then have my initial thoughts on why students might feel anxious, linking to this quote. And it's to do with art students having a higher anxiety and worry level with mental health than other students in, say, a humanities class. I have then combined that with my research, and I have a neutral and a negative view on my questionnaires, which I further develop into a positive structure of communities of practice, linking back to my initial introduction point on assessing work through a projector and having this laid back feel to assessing work and the structure of assessing so that students can understand the assessment process a bit easier without it feeling too daunting. I've then connected this again to the pedagogical theory back to projecting and communities of practice in the studio. This then links to a positive student outcome where the student, although they did negatively in the assessment, when I interviewed them further, they learnt from that mistake, as it were, and have improved it into their current practice as it is. And they've then improved that into their current practice. So that for me is a positive outcome from that interview. I then have an explanation explaining that point and how they have developed into a positive process. And then now I've started point 2, which I will continue tomorrow. Today I continued with my essay and I wrote the second theme in my 5-theme essay, and I did inclusivity, and I've just finished knitting that tonight, and that goes from here. So this is the end point of theme 1, which was anxiety, and then from here this is now inclusivity. I'm going to go through them now. So to begin with, I have my point about inclusivity and how I wondered whether inclusivity is really thought about in the whole assessment process as well as assessment criteria. And that's because students often worried about attendance and attending workshops. So that's where my initial point comes in. I wonder how far does inclusivity get included in that. I then have a medium student view. Now this is student B. Now student B in their actual response doesn't mention inclusivity, but they say that for personal reasons they miss workshops. And I've then got this pink line, which is explanation. Now normally this would go at the end of my point, but I feel like this needs to go into here because I had to explain student B's point. Now student B, as it turned out, had a disability that was not disclosed to the tutors until the COVID-19 outbreak, where this student has a hearing impairment. And they didn't attend workshops because they couldn't actually hear comfortably the lecturer giving the workshop or they couldn't hear necessarily what the instructions were if they were in a studio packed full of people talking. So I felt like that was needed for that bit. I then go on and have a dark purple line, which is a negative student view. So the middle one there was a kind of neutral, it was neither positive nor negative. This one is a negative student view. If we then compared student B's response to how student 2 had, so student 2 is one of the original 6 I had in the questionnaire, who then later did a further on interview with me in more detail. So the essay continues where all 6 of the students believed that some form of attendance was included towards their end grade in that unit, and student 2 had very strong views on this. They said that they thought attendance had a huge influence. Like at the end of my second year, I sometimes found it hard to come in because of my health. I really wanted to do well in my third year, so I asked about online tutorials, and then it was dropped. I mean, I don't even think the uni is inclusive at all. I had the same conversation with my third year tutor, and they said, no, I had to come in, and I couldn't pick and choose. So this was a really strong negative point. This was my quote for constructive alignment. Basically, I felt that this was overall quite a negative viewpoint because there was miscommunication between the 3 years, the second year, third year, and the head of course, on what the student was told that they could have inclusively for their course and what they couldn't. So the second year tutor had said that it was okay to have online tutorials, whereas the third year tutor had refused. I say refused, I have not spoken to the tutor, but this is the words repeated from the student. So the student got quite emotional, so I can't say for or against whether the student was refused or whether it was just not at this time. But from the student's point of view, they felt they were refused. There are circumstances that are out of the university's reach. The tutor has the ability to be able to change some of that to make it more inclusive. So I had that as a sort of medium neutral grade in constructive alignment, and I felt that there's a possibility that the tutor hadn't realised some of the reasons why the student came in. Maybe they didn't realise it was particularly linked to physical health and this caused an issue for the student to come in. Equally, it could be that the tutor felt they were being inclusive by not singling out a student and allowing certain aspects like online tutorials to turn instead of turning up to university, and how this could influence missing of other lectures. So that was the medium point, because I felt maybe the tutor was thinking it was inclusive in another matter, maybe not, maybe they weren't too sure, but there is the option to change. So I have the yellow for how there is a possibility that this could be changed or represented differently. There is the way to change. I then have a pink section because I mention fixed mindset and the self-worth and motivation of a student, because some of the topics that I mentioned affect the student's ability. In this section, the student didn't attend life drawing workshops, but the student themselves are a mature student who is an art teacher outside of schooling hours for an age range of children to young adult to adults, and drawing the body is one of the things that they do, not necessarily a naked body, but drawing the human body is one of the things. So this student felt that of all the things that they could miss, the life drawing workshops were something they could miss and wouldn't feel like it affected their skill set. So the student has a bit of a fixed mindset. However, being told in their feedback that they needed to attend these sessions could cause conflicting views in the student's self-worth, because this is something that they do as part of their job, and overall it will affect their teaching capability outside of university if they feel that they can't get past that. But overall the student didn't feel much difference and change. And then we come to student 2 and the COVID pandemic, and they say that they are quite upset that you couldn't arrange online tutorials for me when I couldn't come in because of my health, yet as soon as all the able-bodied students couldn't get in because of the coronavirus, oh look, suddenly we can arrange online tutorials for everyone. So the student felt quite annoyed by the sudden switch to online teaching, even though this is something that they had asked for from the end of year 2. because nothing had been changed for 3/4 of their third year degree. And suddenly, as soon as it becomes a mass issue, things are changed. And this student had to shield earlier than most had to self-isolate. So for 2 weeks, this student struggled not coming into university because of their health, because they were told not to. And they tried to email into the university to find out what they could do whilst they were at home, and not getting anywhere because emails were not being answered. So this was quite a bad situation and experience for the student. However, the next 3 bits are comparing how year 2s, so this was year 3, how year 2s have experienced this. So going back to student 2 who had the hearing impairment, this student had to divulge the information that they had a hearing impairment to their second year tutor and some of their other workshop runners like myself, because they could not hear in conference calls. And this suddenly brought up a huge issue for the student, because this was what we were going to change to. We were going to change to online conference calls as a way of teaching. They just couldn't physically work that way. So the second year tutor came up with the idea of using Slack as an app, which is a text-based app where you can post content on. And this, I feel, was good constructive alignment and changing in a way that was inclusive for the student, and it wasn't just for this one student, there was an option for everyone to use. And through this online app, they've actually created a bit of a community. Now this is a medium grade green, which earlier I had a light grade green, and that's because I feel that there is potential for this community to grow. However, because it was such a quick shift in change, a lot of the students were thrown into it, and some of the older students, the mature students, are struggling to deal with that online community basis. It is, I can see on a daily basis, it is growing, and that is lovely, but I feel like some of the students would have preferred a bit longer to have got to know it rather than be thrown in on it that way. So that's why there's medium green. And then finally pink is my explanation of it all, and I feel that overall, if the third year teaching had adopted similar views to the second year teaching, things would have gone a lot smoother for everyone. And I think that having the added options for more inclusivity and realigning the course structure has helped create a more community-based atmosphere in the studio once again, in a slightly different way. Rather than it being inside the studio, it's online. And I think that there is a strong need for the alignment in third year course and its assessment process to be reassessed and realigned and consider more inclusive practices, because at the moment I don't think that's happening, and due to the pandemic, complications with inclusivity practices has actually revealed much more than we realised and might not have been quite as apparent before. And it's now become vital that we address these inclusive and exclusive practices and analyse where inclusive practices can be put in place and aid students overall.
So on the third day, I have worked on the tutor input section of my essay, and that is this mountain knitting, from the red to the pale pinky colour. So there's quite a lot of nice colour going on there. And this is actually the longest strip I have done, which the other day was the longest strip. And I have been reflecting upon this process, which is part of the reason why I wanted to knit it along the way, is because I have suddenly realised that in section 1, which is this section here, which seems quite small compared to the other sections I've had, I found 2 more quotes that I could use really well for that one. So there should ideally be another 2 stripes of this colour blue in the first section I had. But that's one of the reasons why I wanted to knit it on the go, because it's really helped me to reflect on my findings. And I think due to the process of knitting it, so I will write out what I want to say in my essay, and then once I've finished that point and I'm happy with that point, I will then knit it that night, like I have now, and then the next day I will go over it again. And because I have knitted it and I have looked at my writing and I have analysed what colour should be what and for what and why what reason it is, that I feel has made me have a more solid grounding in my learning, and I've gone from a surface learner where I've just gone, yep, that works, that kind of fits with that goes with this, into a more deeper learning focus because I have really started to analyse. So for this point I had tutors' input in assessment, and that's because there was a lot of mixed reviews from the students, as you can see here with negative, positive, negative, where students weren't sure about how coherent the tutor had been on their assessment and what they needed to do. And actually the more positive sections I've deducted from my findings, they are second year results, and that is where I've got this one, which is my initial thoughts, where I've gone through it. And I've actually discovered that's because the second year tutor has a lot of cognitive development theory studying, so a lot of MKO, more knowledgeable other learning, and through that learning and sitting at one-to-one tutorials and learning from one another, the student goes from just a simple learner to developing into the zone of proximal development, and through that structure they have learned on what they sort of knew from the assessment, and then through the help of the more knowledgeable other from the tutor, they have reached their zone of proximal development and gone further than they could have done on their own. That's why I have that bit. I then started to query the course structure because it works for the second years, but the third years seem to have negative views, so I think there's something wrong with the constructive alignment there, and that's where I have a quote to say against that. This quote, mixing with this bit, is actually from Biggs in a podcast at university, and that is the fine definition of what constructive alignment should be, with both the student and the tutor listening to one another, and through learning and listening through one another they develop, and it constantly changes and adapts but becomes this perfect object. So that's what I have there. I then have a medium comment, and that's a student who reflects on both their previous tutors and their current tutors, and one is fully positive, one is fully negative, but overall it kind of becomes like a mutual agreement. It goes from there, and then more from there, and this section here is basically how can it be improved, because there's clearly something wrong in terms of the third year alignment, and I think that needs to be assessed and that needs to change overall, and through change it can become fully positive, and maybe there is a reflection that is needed from the second years and the third years. And then here I talk about fixed mindsets again, and threshold concept as such. I don't think I particularly use the word threshold concept, but that can always be changed in an edit. But how changing a student's mind, I think there is a lot of negativity and not I think there's negativity thrown at it because of the way it's being handled. If there was better coherency between the students and the tutors in the third year, there'd be more development. So that's why I've got that bit. And then that's my findings. So yeah, this is how I'm going to sort of develop my documentary as it. I'll probably end up doing is at the end of this when I have knitted all of this, because at the moment it is this long. And I still have another 2 points to go and a conclusion. I will document each day as I have done. At the end of the knitting project I will document it again, running through my written work alongside it. So then, as I am understanding this process more as I go along, I am finding more colour to go with it. I think if I was to go again, as it were, this section, the first section on student anxiety, this section here would actually be a lot bigger because I would be closer analysing and colouring it in. So I think that is something that could be improved overall because it is getting much longer now. But that's because I'm now finding and developing this technique. Today I worked on the grading and feedback part of my essay, which, as we can see here, goes from this red line here all the way to this bit up here. The more I knit, the more I'm understanding it, and the more I'm actually analysing the work I have written, and then realising, well, actually that's communities of practice. I might not say that word exactly, but that process is communities of practice, and it's really cool to have this confidence in what I'm writing and reaffirming it through this form of experimental learning of knitting back to it. And I've never been confident in essay writing, and when I was at UCA Farnham for my degree, I had disability hours with my learning advisor to help with my essays and things, and that would result in recording a theory lecture, re-listening to it before my tutorial with my disability tutor, then re-listening to it whilst going across the slides that I had for that essay, lecture essay, and then discussing how we could produce an essay from that. And through those 3 years, I feel like I'd finally got somewhere with it, and I was really proud of my dissertation and the result I got for my degree. And then it's now been 3 years, something like that, since I've written an essay to this sort of standard, and yeah, I'm really pleased that it seems to be roughly 3 pages per point topic I want to talk about, and I think knitting has helped a lot because it's something that I enjoy, it's something that encourages me and motivates me to continue, and it means that I'm reanalysing my work that I'm looking into because I want it to be colourful, so I want to look and really address what I am saying, and is that a positive point towards communities of practice? Is it a negative point? Is it a neutral point, in which case I'm just mentioning it, so it will be this middle colour there. I have a middle colour for constructive alignment, so that's kind of just mentioning the topic rather than it being for or against it. And yeah, I'm just so thrilled with how much information I have managed to address through this essay, and just seeing it physically like this makes me think, oh my god, this is a lot of work. And the fact that I can pick this up and roughly tell you what my essay is about just through this is pretty epic. So this long piece of work, so probably 5'4.5", it is ever so slightly smaller than me by probably 1 row, which is really cool. And then I've got the conclusion as well, and I got thinking about the conclusion, and which is going to be in, where's my key, my colour key here. My conclusion is going to be in this colour. Now what might happen is although it's only meant to be 9 strands long, depending on how my conclusion goes, it might mean that I have a brief 2 lines rather than 4 lines of communities of practice or constructive alignment or another theory, just to re-highlight what my conclusion is about. But like I said, I think it's through doing this experimental learning and addressing what I know through knitting that has made me more confident and actually interested in changing what I've done as well. So yeah, I'm so pleased I took this option to do for my essay, because if I had just stuck with the essay and not thought about the knitting side of it, I don't think I would have been as motivated, as interested, and learned as much. I've definitely changed my mindset. I'm no longer a closed mindset, I'm open-minded, and yeah, I've not got a fixed mindset. I know I can learn from this and learn more from it. And yeah, I'm just glad I had enough wool in my cupboards to do this during lockdown. So yeah, and the documentation, as you would in animation, you'd have a pre-production, production and post-production schedule. In terms of the videos I'm recording, it's going to be a pre-production of the knitted product / essay, a production of the essay alongside the knitted product, but I'm not recording the essay because that would be really boring, and why would anyone want to know that? So I suppose this knitted diary is kind of the production stage, and then post-production will be a round-off conclusion video of my final piece and how it went.
And I have now finished knitting my scarf and obviously writing the essay alongside it. So this is my conclusion, which I did have to do the end of cast off in the same colour as the introduction because I ran out of wool. This is the only bit of wool that I ran out of, and it was a sample type, and I'm not overly fond of it, which is why I used it. So yeah, I had to change it up, but I quite like how different it is. So, but this is now the section of point 5, which is documentation and language. And it's all done. So now if I were to go from start to finish, this bit was my colour chart where I showed examples. Now the only colour I did not use in this whole scarf is actually the negative point for communities of practice. And I think that's because I didn't actually go in as much depth of it as I thought I was going to for the essay. I'd done quite a lot of research into it, and I had got points that were negative, but I didn't feel it fitted with the essay at this point. So the negative points of communities of practice will go into my conclusion for things that could be improved, and what the issues might be if we use them. So that is that bit. I've decided to make a tiny little pocket and just embroider a Q and an A on it for quality assurance, just for personal preference. And I'm going to halve the scarf in half so it becomes slightly smaller and easier to wear, because it is now over 5'6", which is how tall I am. So it's definitely long and will be heavy. So this was point 1. Again, I felt point 1 should have been bigger, and actually after re-evaluating my essay, there was a couple more quotes I put in. There was another thought about communities practice, so it could have been bigger. And then my second point was this one. My third point was this one, which was getting longer, and I feel like this is where I really started to get into my essay and actually enjoy what I was writing and why I was doing it, and I think the knitting really helped with that. This was then point 4, which again was one of my really long ones. And then this is my final one with my conclusion at the end. So yeah, that is my scarf. My next point I'm going to do in terms of my case study is I'm going to edit all my footage together and produce 3 documents from that. One which is a prep, one that is during, and then one that is after. And go from there.